Hey there folks, Bob Yeager here. So Bobby and I were out doing a little bit of hammock camping yesterday, and we were testing some different configurations. He's just learning how to do his ridge lines and his tarp setups and hammock camping in general. He's done it twice. He's been hammock camping twice, but I basically set everything up for him. Back then he was about 9 or 10 years old. He's 13 now, so I said, well, it's about time you start setting up your own gear so I don't have to do it all the time, but also so he knows how to do it when he goes out with his friends and stuff. Now he's working on his finishing up his life rank for scouts and moving on to doing his eagle, and I like for him to practice all the things that he's learned thus far, like his lashes and his knots and all those different things. But typically when I'm doing a hammock setup on the ridgeline, I'll be using a trucker's hitch on one side. Well, the trees here aren't far enough apart to do the trucker's hitch, because it would come out so far that he wouldn't be able to stretch his tarp all the way over. This tarp goes almost from tree to tree, and he had to hang it in diamond configuration because his hammock is so long and the tarp is a bit shorter, that in an A-frame configuration for high weather like storms and stuff like that, it wouldn't quite fit under there and everything. All right, so what he did was a diamond configuration. The only part where he messed up a little bit was there's no loop on this tarp in the center. See, where my other tarp, it does have one. So there's no way to lash that center of the tarp up to the ridge line. So what he should have done, which I don't really like doing because it kind of wears out the tarps after a while, he should have put it over the ridge line and then stretched it out, and that would have kept a solid ridge for the center of his tarp so it doesn't droop like that. Luckily, no rain held up there. Everything stayed dry underneath and everything. And he did bring 2 different tarps with him. One's on the ground, and he was seeing which one would be the right size for his particular hammock. And this is the key to it. We're in our backwoods here. We're not out at some campsite or anything like that. It's our campsite. And we practice with our gear. So we'll bring it out, we'll set it up, we'll tear it down, we'll set it up, we tear it down. We try different tarp configurations, that kind of stuff. And it makes for a nice little workshop area for us to do this kind of stuff for him and for the Woodcraft League and stuff. But when there's no loop on the center of your tarp, there's no way to attach it to a ridgeline up here unless you put like a stick or a rock up inside the tarp and wrap a piece of bank line and flip it up over and do all that stuff. But once again, you're wearing out your tarp doing that kind of thing too many times. And with these thin tarps, this isn't a very expensive tarp. With these thin tarps, you start wearing down the centers of them and everything. So what I would do in this situation is, you could see that orange ridge line going across there. I would actually put this tarp up over that ridge line. Now over here, he just did a kind of a ratchet hitch off the tree here, pulled it tight, ratcheted around there, pulled it tight again, and then just did a quick slip knot on there. And then right here, you can see he has a prusik loop here. It's going through the loop on the tarp, not the grommet. We don't really use the grommets. And then he just made a toggle and put a toggle in there to hold it in place. That's easy up and easy down. So when we go to take this down, we just slide the prusik over, pull this toggle out, and the tarp's off, right? When we go to take the ridgeline down, we just pull this right here. It undoes this, undo the ratchet, and pull it down, all right? You can see his hammock underneath there. It's squarely underneath, pretty good. It's hanging nice and low, not too taut, nice and comfortable. He's got a sleeping bag and a mattress pad in there, like an inflatable, self-inflatable in there. And on the ground, he just had that extra tarp just for a dry place to put his shoes, and when he gets up in the morning, he can put his feet down there and everything. And then he has his chair hiding underneath there. It was a pretty wicked stormy night last night, but everything under there stayed dry. Now, because he used my rainfly tarp instead of using this one, which this one's really good. I mean, it's really long and everything. But when you put this one on a diamond configuration, it's for the trees we had to work with here. Let me move this back so you can see. For the trees we had to work with here, this wouldn't work on the diamond configuration because the tarp would have been up inside the tree, right? Now, what I think I would have done in the future is maybe come back. If you see on the bottom, there's a loop there, there's one there, there's one there. It's got a bunch of loops on it. I probably would have came in a loop and still did the diamond and let the end of it just kind of hang down. Well, we did an A-frame configuration here. because I was showing them different configurations for different weather. Like if it's snowing, which I do hammock camp in the snow and everything. If it's snowing, I want an A-frame configuration. It's stronger. The snow can just fall right down off the tarp. It can even pow up on the edges. It's not gonna really matter or anything. Where if we do like his and it wasn't tied up to the ridge line and it snowed, that would smash that tarp straight down, right? Plus this gives more shelter area around the hammock. So if the rain's not gonna blow in, the wind here is blowing this way, okay? So towards the wall of this tarp. So it's basically like a great big tent for a tarp, or for a hammock, right? If you see inside, really nice. I don't have any kind of ground cloth. I didn't need one. It's still dry in there. And when I talk about a downpour, I'm talking like there's streams of water coming down through this area here. This is all dry under here. I got my 2 dry bags. That's what we carried our gear out in. And I have a small chair in there, and I got plenty of room to sit in there and be just fine. Actually, there's room for both of us to sit in here, okay? So this tarp's much bigger than that one. Once again, we didn't use a trucker's hitch on this one because the trees, they're just not very far apart, and that trucker's hitch comes out a little bit too far. So when we were pulling our prussics up, it was smacking the trucker's hitch, and it wasn't getting as much tightness on the tarp as we like. In this situation, instead of making toggles, I had a couple extra tent stakes, and I just put the tent stake through here to hold it in place. So I just got to pull that out, tarp comes down, and it's easy up, easy down. On the outside, he put a stake on the corners. Let me see if I can get you where you can see it. Put a stake on the corner, one in the center, one on the corner. Same on the other side. So this is really secured to the ground. The water was just bouncing off of it basically. Fix my tripod here. The water was just bouncing off of it basically, and nothing underneath this tarp got wet. Underneath that tarp, around his hammock, underneath his hammock stayed completely dry, but towards the edges, I'll show you here. You could almost see it in the camera here. Around these edges stayed dry like that, and like an oval just under his hammock. But over here, it's all wet, right? And although his hammock is damp, it's not wet, it's damp. Right here, coming back here, it's not damp at all. All right. Now, the other thing I try to teach people with the hammock camp and stuff, and I was teaching Bobby yesterday, was he started, because I always say, you know, hey, don't make a mess of all your stuff hanging all over the place and everything, wrap stuff up. He started wrapping up these tree straps. That's the situation where I don't wrap them up. I let them hang to the ground, and I'll show you why. So when it rains, no matter how far you got this tarp out here and everything, these tree straps are around the tree, and they get wet because they're on a tree. And so when it's raining, these get wet, and this tree strap will wick that water up. And what happens a lot of times is that water will start running down through here. And if you have this all wrapped up and bunched up and wrapped around the end of your hammock, that water will wick straight through into your hammock. But when it's on this side of the carabiner here, when it's on this side of the carabiner and hanging down, that water comes down the tree strap and straight down to the ground. So it doesn't actually wick down in. And this is under the tarp, right? So that water's just gonna wick and drip straight to the ground, so it's not running into your hammock. And that's those little things you just learn over time from experience of doing stuff. Now, once again, now if you look up here, all I do is tie a bowline on the end of our ridge line. This is 2 different ridge lines, one for mine and one for his. We tie a bowline on the end. We just run the ridge line through the bowline, and then we stick a toggle in there, a stick, to hold it in place. That way, all I have to do is pull that stick out, the ridge line comes down. I like easy up, easy down. This configuration of Bobby's took maybe about 5 minutes, put the ridge line up with the tarp on it. So immediately we had shelter, it's done, right? Now, a lot of people will put their hammock up and then their tarp. I do just quite the opposite. I do the tarp first, so I know how high I can go with it. And then I get my hammock up. And I'm typically, a lot of people like chest height and everything like that. Bobby's a little bit taller than me. His chest is about up to here on me. And this is a bit higher than that. And it's because he also weighs probably about 30 or 40 pounds more than I do. So when he gets into the hammock, guess what happens? It compresses down further, right? You follow the rule, don't hang your hammock any higher than you're willing to fall from. When he hangs his hammock and he actually gets into it, you can see right now, it's about roughly 3 feet off the ground. When he gets into it, it's only about maybe a little over 2 feet off the ground. So he's still high enough off the ground. He's not going to touch or anything like that. If he did fall out of his hammock, it's not very far to fall, which we've never fallen out of them, but hey, you never know, right? And then he has a ground cloth down to put his feet on, so his socks don't get wet when he gets up and everything. The way I hammock camp is fairly lightweight. So even now, these chairs, they used to be super cheap. Now they're like, I don't know, they're probably like $50. This is the Marchway off of Amazon. I love this chair. I gave this one to Bobby because he's a bigger kid, and having a high back on a chair is really nice after you've been hiking. You can sit down and just kind of fall into it, and it's sturdy. It's easy, very, very lightweight to carry. It fits right into our packs. So when we're backpacking, a Ridgeline, our Prusik loops, I keep some extra Tarred Mariner's bank line as our guy lines. Our tree straps and our hammock. Tree straps in the hammock go into one stuff pouch. The pouch is connected to the hammock. And then the tarp, we have a separate little stuff pouch for that. The separate ground tarp, it weighs almost nothing. That has its own stuff pouch. And then this chair has its own bag that it goes into. All of that with our cooking gear fits into a pack, and we're bringing in maybe 15 pounds or something like that, minus food and water, okay? The sleeping gear is very, very lightweight because it's summertime. It's September, but it's still really, really warm out. So we have a regular summertime sleeping bag. He brings a pillow with him. I don't sleep with a pillow. I usually just fold up my jacket if I need a pillow. And then we have our self-inflatable mattresses. Our whole kit weighs in around 15 pounds. Like I said, minus food and water. You add your food and water, you're probably looking at another 5 or 10 pounds, right? And unless you're bringing freeze-dried foods and stuff like that. We like to eat when we camp. So this configuration does work really well. The difference here is 2 tent stakes on the ground to hold the corners down, right? Where over there we could get away with 4 on the ground, but we have 6 on the ground just for extra stability in the center of the tarp. Then I have 2 up top. So I have 8 tent stakes over here where he has 2 over here, right? Now these are aluminum tent stakes. They don't really weigh all that much and everything, but if you're worried about ounces, you know, every ounce is gonna matter. In this situation, we carried a dry camping duffel bag. It also acts as a backpack. Both of our kits fit into that one, and Bobby carried it. He hauled it in. I carried the chair bag because I'm dad and I've been carrying enough stuff over the years, right? So he had that one duffel bag with both of our hammock camping gear in it, all on its own. It's probably weighing in about 15, 16 pounds. And like I forgot to mention, when I say 15 pounds, I'm talking both of these setups weigh roughly just under 15 pounds. So both of them, right? So we're able to consolidate that into one bag. He carries it on his back. It's really easy for him to carry a long distance. And plus we have the dry bag itself. So if we have any extras that, you know, things we don't want to have get wet, anything like that, we're concerned they'll get wet, we could stuff them into that bag and seal it up and everything's going to stay dry in there, right? So he's carrying that pack. And if it's got food in it, we're looking at probably another 5 pounds. We carry our own water. I don't make him carry all my water too. But another thing we bring with us that's within that weight is this, not this stuff. This table right here. It's just a little aluminum table I got off of Amazon. Folds up nice and neat. It's called a Hitor hike, H-I-T-O-R-H-I-K-E. They're about 20 or 30 bucks. You know, you don't think you need that thing. And you think, I could do without it. Man, is it nice to have a chair on each side and a little end table in between to set your stuff on or to even eat on when you're hiking by yourself, solo hiking or whatever. It's so nice. It's so nice just to have that little thing, and it weighs almost nothing. Maybe, I'm gonna say maybe it weighs a pound, but it's probably less than that. But so these are two configurations. So I'm gonna use an A-frame for harsh weather. Obviously you're not gonna get as much airflow in this. So if it's really hot out, this is probably not the route you wanna go. But when you know there's a downpour coming, you know there's snow coming, things like that, this is really gonna help you out. If you know it's gonna be a high wind situation, this is really gonna help you out. Just wanna make sure, try to make sure if you can, that your wall is facing towards where the wind's coming in. That way it blocks that wind. Like you won't want the wind just creating a big wind tunnel there, right? With the diamond configuration, you're gonna get more airflow, right? You're still gonna stay dry, but you don't have as much cover. Notice the sides of the hammock are right here. They're still under the tarp, but if the rain's blowing sideways on you, that's gonna get all wet, right? There's not as much cover underneath when you're sitting under there, but there's enough for at least one person. Now, the other thing you could do, which we had discussed yesterday, if it wasn't gonna rain or anything like that, we could take that corner and ridgeline it off to a tree, just guy it off to a tree. So this is up in the air and you still have that canopy. You're still protected under there, but you get more airflow and you can actually sit and look out. And because we got it's nice looking down over across the valley here with the trees and everything. So sometimes you just want to view. So in the daytime, you might guy line that to a tree, have it up, it's going to storm at night or whatever. You want a little more protection from the wind in the night, and you can stake it down to just bring it down and stake it down to the ground. Same thing over here. Even with the A-frame configuration, I could very easily pull those stakes off the bottom and raise that up. I could put a pole on each side for the corner or one in the middle and raise it up and just stake the other two ends down and have kind of like a canopy with an A-frame on it. I could have a lean-to configuration. And quite honestly, since it's connected to the ridgeline right there, I can easily just flip that over to the other side if I just want to sit in my hammock and, be under the lean-to side of things. And I'm not worried about this right now. Maybe I want the warmth of the fire or whatever. I could just flip that over. But typically what I'd do is prop one corner up or prop the center up and fold the corners over and connect them in the middle and just have a pole leaning to hold it up. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. And because this has so many loops on it, if you want a little more room underneath, like maybe it is storming really bad and both of you guys want to stay under here, or you want to use it as kind of like where you're going to eat and everything like that. Well, it's really easy to grab one of these loops and guy it out up to a tree to create more space underneath, right? So by doing that, you're creating more space underneath, more headroom underneath, so you can sit and relax. There's even been times I've attached my hammock, because I have this tube that my hammock goes in to keep it dry. I've attached it to my ridge line during the day just to keep it up, and we have that whole area underneath to sit. Another thing I could do is elevate this up into the trees, like get the ends off the ground and just have a nice canopy elevated above me. If it's really hot out, that's what I'm usually going to do, is have it elevated above. So I have, like, we're getting leaves falling, autumn's coming and everything. You get the leaves falling, you get, rain and those things, but it's still really warm out. You can just have a ceiling here, a canopy ceiling elevated above the trees. But keep in mind, you're going to need more trees to tie off to, or you're going to need poles to secure the corners up and out of the way. You're going to need more cordage material, like your paracord or whatever you're using, and it's going to catch the wind. So it's like a parachute, it's going to catch the wind a bit. So you have to take all those things into consideration. But the purpose of this exercise here was get him setting up a hammock camp in multiple configurations. And these actually weren't the only configurations. We did two others yesterday. But this was what we decided, especially me, this is what I decided I want for my sleeping, because this is my typical setup when I go hunting and things like that. I set up like this because I'm usually out, and it's Pennsylvania. In the fall, it rains, it snows, all the weather happens, right? So I like having that. Bobby really wanted a lot more airflow. So he did that configuration. Like I said, what I would have done is turn the tarp up over. We just weren't thinking about it at the time. But these two configurations are pretty standard. You can do a lot with it. And I would suggest that you take into consideration that if you are going hammock camping, I also have a 2-man hiking tent. It's really small, it's really cramped when we're both in there. We each have one, but if we're looking at reducing weight, we're only gonna bring one with us because we always bring our hiking poles anyway. And it's really easy to use our hiking poles real quick to prop up the tent on each side. Those tents are around $50 or $60 for cheap ones, and those are the ones we use. They're extremely lightweight, so we bring a tent with us as well. Why? Well, because sometimes there's not enough distance between the trees, okay? Usually we can find at least one set of trees where we can set up one hammock. Sometimes finding 2 sets where 2 guys can set up hammocks is not as easy. It just depends on where you're at. And if you're going to public campgrounds and stuff like that, it's even more difficult a lot of the times. So what we'll do is we'll bring at least one tent with us and the 2 hammock setups. Sometimes one of us is in the tent and one of us is in the hammock. Sometimes both of us are in the tent because we just can't find a good setup for hammocks. Maybe the trees are just way too far apart or way too close together, and we just can't set up. Well, that hammock's our backup. Now, keep in mind, we could just use one of these tarps as our shelter and use the other tarp as the ground cloth and set up right on the ground, and we'd be just fine, right? So you don't have to bring that extra tent. I just like, if I'm gonna be on the ground, like to have that extra shelter and security. It keeps the crawlies out. Like I primitive camp a lot on the ground when I'm hunting and things like that. But we got ticks, you know, there's just so many elements of why it's great to have an enclosed shelter if you can. Now, in the hammocks, we're up off the ground. None of that really matters. And you still get ticks, trust me. But when you're on the ground, having a tent's really nice. And you can always use one of your rain flies from your hammock set up as your ground cloth or whatever, so you don't have the extra weight of an extra ground cloth on top of that, right? But just wanted to show you guys that, and that's it. Take care. Oh, do what we did. Go practice. We're gearing up for a big camp Bobby and I are doing together. Likely either up towards Slippery Rock or up in the Laurel Highlands. We have two locations picked out. We're not sure which one we want to do yet. It's at the end of September, beginning of October. And this was us setting up and practicing, getting the gear up. What did we forget? What is something that would have made it more convenient? What is something we brought that we didn't need to bring? We went minimal on gear this time. I mean, I'm talking bare bones. We didn't bring half the stuff that we usually bring. And quite honestly, we didn't need that stuff. It's one of those, the more you know, the less you need, right? So if I could compel you, especially right now, the fall season and the winter season are perfect times to camp. You don't have as much of the bugginess, the humidity. It's beautiful. You get to experience different types of weather. You get to play with different types of gear. You get to do different types of projects at camp. That's what Woodcraft's really all about, is, you know, working on your skills while you're out there. But most importantly, you know your gear before you go, right? You know, is my ridge line, are my ridge lines long enough? Do I have enough cordage for my prussics and my guy lines and my, you know, whatever, my loops for my tent stakes and things like that? Are my tree straps strong enough? Are they good enough? Is any of my gear worn out? Like I found out pulling my really nice hammock out of the bag, there's a hole in my bug net right where a loop was that I usually attach to my ridge line. And I know what that's probably from, and I've always been concerned about this. It attaches to your ridge line. Then when you sleep in your hammock, it stretches. And if you have your hammock too tight, what happens is now your bug net's too tight. So when you lay in it, it rips it. Go figure. I'm okay with it. I just kept it zipped up and over top of me, and I have plenty of space between my face and it. It didn't really bother me or anything. But I can see how it would be a lot hotter in the summer months if that bug net was like right here. You'd be surprised how much heat that keeps in, actually. With Bobby's old hammock we first set up, he just didn't fit it in anymore. It just didn't work. So I grabbed one of my other hammocks that I use during hunting season, and he fit perfect in that. It's double wide really well. And then he just did the old water bottle trick. He put a water bottle in the bag, the stuff sack that's attached to the hammock, and he flipped it over and used the hammock to cover himself up like a cocoon. So very minimal gear, and we realized that this is like the perfect setup for this, minus like food and you know, cooking implements and things like that. But if we were on a 15-20 mile hike, even a 50-mile hike, we'd be good with this. This setup would be good for us. So the key here was we got out and practice. We tie knots, lashes, set up, tear down, set up, tear down, set up, tear down, and keep on doing it until it becomes muscle memory for us. Figuring out which configurations we like the best. Like I said, he really likes that diamond configuration, which I do a lot of the times too. But during these months, just from experience and years of doing this, I noticed the A-frame is kind of my go-to for the most part. It's pretty easy to set up real quick. I don't have to get creative with any kind of fancy tarp configurations. I'm just making a tent, right? And I have the option of lifting one side if I want a little more airflow or whatever. But if I could compel you, take your kids, go out in the backyard, go out in the backwoods, wherever you can go. A lot of people think, well, I can't go camping. I only have like one day this weekend that I'd be able to get away. Okay, so go Friday evening after work, set up, come home Saturday. I've done that plenty of times where I took my family. I'm like, hey, let's run up to the mountains, just camp overnight, get some lunch the next day and head back home. And we've done that plenty of times. It's just about getting out there more often and experiencing your gear more often and experimenting with things and giving yourself the opportunity to enjoy that. You'll find more and more, they're just like, hey, a day was good. A day camp was nice. I enjoyed that. An overnighter was good. And then we go home. Plenty of people do that. It's not about going away for 2 or 3 days all the time or 4 or 5 days all the time. Sometimes it's just an overnighter, right? So find a cut of woods, get out there, experiment with your gear, bring the kids along with you and teach them how to do this stuff. And like I said, you set it up, you tear it down, you set it up, you tear it down, you set it up. And most importantly, practice folding it all back up and putting it back in your bags to see if you can pack it the same way or better than you did when you left your house, right? I've seen people coming home from camping and their cars are just scattered with their gear because they just shoved it in their cars and didn't, you know, do all the stuff. No, practice. And see, am I giving myself enough time? Like it rained last night, there's wet leaves all over this stuff and everything. Do I want to fold that up and put it in the stuff sacks and stuff? Not really, but I am going to. I'm going to shake all the leaves off and everything. I'm going to hang this stuff up a little bit, let the water drip off a bit. It's going to be damp. I'm going to fold it up, put it in the stuff sacks. And when I get back to the house, I'm going to unfold it all and open it up and let it all air out and dry out. But I'm going to put it back the same way that I packed it originally. Why? Because that's the way it fits in my pack. I don't want to be carrying a bunch of stuff, going through the woods, snagging on things and everything. I want it back in my gear the way I originally had it packed, if not better. Maybe I figured out like, I should have done this and that before I packed that gear. Well, now's my opportunity to do that, right? So these are the things we learn just by practice and doing. But if you're not practicing and doing, that's why camping becomes an uncomfortable experience for a lot of people, right? So just some food for thought. Take care. Enjoy your camping.